Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Never Not Here. Richard Miller here. And we're starting the new year with some more discussion. It's kind of what this show is all about. And there's so many ways to look at life. And I was listening to somebody speak about history the other day. And he was saying that he was talking about, let's say, 50 different cultures or 50 different cultures that had dominated the earth at one time or another, had been running strong, let's say. And of course, the only thing that was similar to every last one of them was that they all died. And but just think about it, 50 different ways to be programmed and different ways to look at life. That's just 50 of them that, like Mesopotamia or Egypt or Romans or Greeks or Hebrew, Judaic, all these things, Aramaic, Chinese, Japanese, so and so and so on, and also Aboriginal, all these different societies and different ways to look at life, and somehow a different belief structure, different and a life that unfolded out of that belief structure and somehow appeared to be real. And of course, now we're on the real one, the real one. So I'm going to talk about these things with a storyteller, because we're all telling ourselves a story, and sometimes we tell each other stories. So please help me welcome Anthony Tarsitano.
How you doing, Richard? Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate it.
Where I'm driving at is that, in a way, what we react to is what we tell ourselves, or our interpretive powers. That's the kind of a basic human quality, interpretation, which means basically the ability to abstract. Our abstractions cut us apart from most other animals as far as we know it. And so then it seems like as our life, a lot of times, a lot of parts of our lives, we're really heavily focused on what we're telling ourselves and how our life should, what we're telling ourselves, how our life should unfold, and focusing on the strategies for making that happen, and somehow feeling good when it does, and feeling okay when it seems like we were onto it and we're able to make some changes and make some things happen, and feeling worse when it seems like it's a total dead failure. And then what happens? I guess if we're lucky, we might ask ourselves, well, what is it who's watching these strategies? And is there a value to that too? And that's some kind of an introspection, a shift in focus, a softer focus that maybe includes everybody's descriptions and wishes, and just to see, well, who is it, even for those people who is it that's at the core of that whole unfolding? And then our stories maybe are okay, but they're not primary anymore. We're just watching. Is that rare? Some of us do that.
Some of us watch and tell too, Richard.
some of us, watch and tell pretty automatic. Usually I blame it on girls, but sometimes you see a lady that really whatever crosses her brain pours out of her mouth. And I don't know. I've been talking to a few people that cite Jung, Carl Jung, and he watched and he told. And I don't know. Just comes to me that, for instance, saying the personality is developed by 7 years of age. Maybe that was one, or maybe it's earlier. Who knows? Some people talk about 4 years old, but as if the personality was a solution to a certain amount of hurts. And but again, in those 50 societies that I was talking about, they all had different solutions and all had different, it seemed like different hurts, I suppose. And all of them watched and told, and they watched and told a different story. How come?
It seems like there may be a universal thread that we all kind of share, obviously. And I guess those stories just, all that changes is the clothes and the times and the language. But I think those threads are the same. Or maybe the same, pretty close.
We really can only know our own thread for sure. I suppose we can ask other people what their threads are, but we can't really ask anyone from yesterday or yesteryear. So then we can look at a cave painting or something like that and make a lot of assumptions. Actually, all of history is a made-up story, just with sometimes just tiny shreds of evidence. And yet, if you go to the museum, they'll have little villages all made out in the sand, and this is the way it was, and they all live like this, and all they have is a couple of little tools or something. From a skeleton, they'll get a facial. So by telling a story, we're recreating it, or we're making it more real, right? All the stories, even the Big Bang, even the stars, even the way the galaxies are. I guess I'm driving at something like if you tell a story that a man is an aggressive creature, or greed, because we have our own interest, self-interest is our preservation, is our first interest. Then that story becomes real, and everybody's willing to act it out. Then we believe man is an aggressive creature, and then somehow we need laws and conflict. To conflict moderation is a major ingredient of society. I guess I have doubts. Good introspection is made up of some certain amount of doubt, right?
Absolutely.
But you had doubt in your life too. right? I mean, you change courses at certain times. If there was no doubt, you'd always be on the same course from the very beginning. Your first career would be your last career.
Yeah, I think that the inevitability, as you said earlier, when things are going well, the doubts seem less. You're very sure of yourself. You're very sure of the world you chose, the whole thing. But as things progress and the flip side of that coin shows up, the doubts show up. So I think that that is probably always seems to be there in some shape, matter, or form that has to be questioned the deeper you go and the more you look inside. But yeah, at one time there's less doubt, especially when things are well.
Just imagine a time if everything went right. If you were Midas and you had a Midas touch, everything turned to gold. And so then you'd start touching bigger and bigger things until you wanted to touch mountains. And in other words, it would bring a life of exaggeration if everything went the way you predetermined it. That would really, until finally everything would burst. The whole world would burst if that could be true.
Yeah, that hitting the wall at different stages in the journey of your appearing personal life. Some people seem to have a longer period where that doesn't happen, and some seem to be born with that question and that ability to see through it much earlier. And some of us have to just find it maybe midway through that particular life's journey. Sort of how I feel what happened to me.
Lately, I've been thinking that we really react to our interpretation. We react, meaning like all our emotions and actually our, what would you call it? Our mood. If we're depressed or if we're up or if we're intellectual or if we're pleaser, please everybody, nice person. All these things kind of are reactions of the way we interpret life. And we can't really be sure where that comes from. But it's not so much, I don't see how it can be so tightly connected to what is out there, so-called, because our sister or brother react in a different way to the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so then they tell themselves something else for whatever reason, I don't know. And then they have a different emotion and a different mood, and so then that seems to be like a handle or a point where you can grab onto life, what you tell yourself, your interpretation of your life. And then, like I say, I don't really know where it comes from, but you can kind of play a game where you switch it around a little bit just to see what happens. And you can feel better, just like religions tell you to feel grateful. And they're saying, well, change your story. Focus on the part that works instead of the part that doesn't. And then you have a different feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah, the lens that you look at life through is obviously how you see things unfold, and it, as we all know, it reflects it right back to you just the way you, as you said, interpret it, as you see it. Now you can wake up one day and see your life as fine and wake up the next day with the same circumstances and see everything that's wrong. It's like someone switched the lenses in the middle of the night. You're right. Those are the trappings of how we perceive our lives and what we do. Absolutely. I don't know if that's a place to talk a little bit about what I was doing when I made the film. I think I needed to show that interpretation of a character and how he saw his life and how it reflected it back and how it started to change as he started to interpret and see things differently. I think it was obviously the transition or the change in character. And I think that is the universal, to some degree, experience when there's that shift, if that shift isn't already in place, when you can move. And I forget where I read sometimes maybe it was in an old TV show, The Prisoner, and he said, change your perspective. He said, go stand in the corner on your head. and that always stuck in my head as a very very visual change in perspective, seeing the same room in a different way. Um, and I think those are the shifts. Those are the big shifts when you can do that.
Just to say to everyone that the film is, I don't know if you can see it. I guess you can't see it from here, but it's called Calling It Quits. So, but you're saying if the shift is in place already, what did you mean by that?
The shift became inevitable because the interpretation that you had, or the interpretation of your life, can get so muddled or dark that you realize that that interpretation is as much of a lie as when you saw your life as perfect and just the way you want it. So that leaves you in this kind of place where you have to totally not eliminate the interpretation, but recognize that each interpretation may not be true or is a lie. And that idea of like standing on your head and looking at it differently uh, gives you that chance to eliminate that, whether each interpretation had any truth in it. It had truth because it was part of the whole thing, but it was not true in sense of the way your life really was. It was the way you choose to see it. So I think the shift was in place when those, I think the interpretations get to a place where you don't like it. You're seeing it very negatively, or to the point again where it's so muddled that there's no clarity and there's no other place to have another interpretation. So the shift, I think, in the character or in myself, in both cases, happened out of where do you turn? Where else is there to look when you found out that all the interpretations were just that, sort of an empty, a little bit of a lie that you told yourself.
Right, sort of arbitrary. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a way that you're saying when your interpretation doesn't work, then you're all kind of up against the wall. But in a way, in this character, Dante, his interpretation was working all the time, right? He was like a star at this marketing firm, and he was the big key,
Mm-hmm.
with all the major clients. But something in there wasn't enough, something in, that whole story
Mm-hmm.
was almost like a postponement of whatever was fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, as far as the story went, it was always a total success. Isn't that how it was? That it was always a total success. But then he saw through that was an incomplete story.
Yeah, I think as I experienced in my own life, even whether your desires are not conscious, there's a move towards accomplishment, believing that that accomplishment is going to bring that happiness and so on that you think each stage is going to give you. And then at a certain point, when you reach a certain level of accomplishment and success, and nothing has changed. As a matter of fact, there's more of an emptiness than there was before. That. So now what? Is it a bigger house? Is it a better car? Is it a bigger client? And you realize that none of those are going to fulfill because you've reached a point where that doesn't work. So your whole life now, interpretation is blown out the window. And, there is absolutely no way. I liken it to, I told someone, when you're a kid and you stop believing in Santa Claus, there's no way anyone's ever going to convince you he's real again once you recognize that truth as a kid. And it's the same thing with my life. I felt like there was a certain point where once Santa Claus was revealed as not being true, you're a little bit, where do I turn? And that's where you do have to turn internal, because there's nothing external that can fulfill you. You recognize that. So yeah, the character and myself, I think those were both true. Success is not equated with bliss or happiness, for sure.
Many teachers and even many gurus, and even in India, they talk about it a lot. They say something like, what makes everybody the same? Well, everybody is searching for happiness, they say. I don't know. We mentioned just happiness a second ago, but I'm not so sure that's the case. But I mean, somehow happiness maybe is a metaphor for for wholeness, actually, or for not needing anything, or for not having to, being complete. Somehow there's a certain completeness that we're looking for, and happiness might even be temporary. When you get a new car, it will last for a week or two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, and then they say, well, okay, when you get something, that's because your desire for a moment is gone, and so then that feels like happiness. But anyhow, happiness isn't really an endpoint. It's just a metaphor for not being needy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's true. It's as much as what it's not as what it is.
So then, to go back to the very beginning of the conversation, how I started to introduce it, we're saying that man by nature is needy, and so
Mm-hmm.
on, and all all these forces come, trying to fulfill those needs. I mean, a lot of people have told me, oh, there's the basic needs. You got to be clothed, you got to be fed, you got
Mm-hmm.
to have companionship. I say, no, you don't. I mean, just look in your fridge. It's full of food. Look in your closet. It's full of clothes. Stand by the door when your wife comes home from work. You do have companionship. So then those aren't needs. Needs, it's a theory about needs, but you don't have them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's
This
what
is,
I'm wondering. I'm wondering, well, what is the story we can tell about mankind? That would there be a story that would be not so slanted, like one of the 50 cultures? I mean, even each one has their own story and their own series of problems and their own series of neediness. And I mean, one guy was saying actually Egypt was the longest lasting civilization, and that food just hopped out, just jumped out of the ground around the Nile. So that wasn't one of the needs.
not unlike here. Yeah, I think the needs are. I almost see it. I would also interpret it as something like security. Um, and there's a sense that you could substitute happiness for security, or a sense of security in what you've accomplished. I think that's the seeking. I think that's part of it. That if you feel like, okay, I've got all this, I've got the food in the refrigerator, I've got the house, I've got the wife, however you want to interpret those things, but there's a sense of security in having those. So that's, I think, the ultimate need. There's a sense of, the more I can feel secure, the more money, the more friends, the more this, the more that, then I'm on the right track. And again, that's an interpretation.
What what is the meaning of security then?
I think the meaning of security was used, I think, used the word feeling whole. I think there's a sense that I've got everything in place. It's sort of like, the chess pieces on the board are exactly where you want them to be, and you're in command of the board, and at the same time, you're protected by all the things you've assembled, whether, they're material things or seemingly emotional things. And so I think that's what I mean by security. It's a safety, and at the same time a confidence that you're out there, and you can be both aggressive and protected at the same time. And I use the word aggressive. I don't mean that in a physical sense. I mean that in a sense of confidence and so on. So I think there's a contentment or a happiness, security, and all of that, depending on, again, who you are and what your nature is.
I was looking at security. I don't know. I was thinking like, okay, so you got food, you got clothes, you got companionship, but the idea is that maybe you won't have it tomorrow.
Yeah,
So
well,
if somehow that idea could get, you'd have an insurance policy now against that stuff, so that even tomorrow, if the insurance company was good enough, then you'd need security. The feds would have to back up the insurance company, right?
right,
But I
right.
mean, it's totally like it's like a recalcitrant little boy, that says, "Okay, now you're totally fulfilled. You got everything you need." And you say, "Well, still, I'm not happy. I want it to be here tomorrow." Well, that's just
Well, now
really a fantasy, isn't it?
now you have to worry about it. Yes, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you just don't want it. Is basically you don't want it. You got it, and you don't want it. So then you make up a story that says, "Well, what about tomorrow? I want it tomorrow too." Well, there is no tomorrow. Just have it today instead.
it's that whole thing of holding on to first place is a lot harder than getting to first place. You see it in sports as maybe a poor metaphor or analogy, but a team can win World Series one year. Try it again next year, or try to stay in place. There's that fulfillment of that moment for that team. But the harder part is doing it again and again and again. So I think you're right. Once you have that sense of security or happiness or whatever word we want to use, the next becomes the fear of losing it. So before it was the desire to get it, and then the opposite side of the coin comes in, which is I'm afraid to lose it now that I've got it, and how do I protect it? The two drivers, desire and fear, I think are obviously come into play there. Well, with security, it's a moving target.
In one way, desire and fear are the same, because if you desire something, and so it's softer fear, because you're saying, well, I'm afraid that if I don't have a new car and a membership to the golf club, that I won't be as satisfied as my neighbor. And that's in a way a fear too, and it's an incompleteness or a neediness. And I don't know, let me just back up a sec, because we were talking about your life unfolding, in the sense that your feelings and your felt sense and your what you get is how you interpret things. And then we talked a little bit about strategies and getting focused on strategies for of how to get things, and then also on measuring, which is also an abstraction, looking to see if the strategy is already being fulfilled a little or a lot or not at all. And then that the felt sense out of those would be your mood, like you're really up because you think you're a success, or you're really depressed because you think you're a dead failure.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's all just looking at your interpretations. And then I was saying that sometime we have to kind of say, well, who's doing that interpretation, and is there any value there? And so I would put that on the same thing about, like, if you're saying I got everything I need, but now I'm not secure. Well, that's still your interpretation, or like who's not. That's the same thing as having a strategy of now getting a promotion to be a bigger player at work, and to see how you're moving on that. I mean, it's just like doesn't really. It's a game that's okay, but it doesn't have anything to do with here and now, and really the part of your life that's living.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a game that your piece is playing. And so the same thing with security. I mean, somehow you have to get away from security and say, well, life is here and now. It doesn't have much to do with some idea about when something might be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what your show, in a way, is about, But I mean, it's one way. Your movie is one way to kind of come. It's one story to tell about it. But the whole point to me was that the guy actually did that introspection and was able to question how life appeared, and I think it's a continuous openness. He's not going to find an answer, because that's the old paradigm, that there is an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Life is in the living of it, not in I don't know, not in the story of it.
Not means to an end. There is no end to it. It's just a process. It's a life.
It's unfolding, right? Yes,
constantly. I think that's one of the things I tried to do in the film too. Sometimes I called it the journey to the journey. I don't, without giving away the end per se. I don't. Leave the character or the person in a complete knot that it's all resolved like most film. The idea is to bring to some resolution the change in character, but yeah, it's an ongoing process. He, like most of us, is a work in progress, always, going in and out, ebb and flow of, consciousness, and letting the real world sometimes spin you around. And I think that's what the character's doing, but his interpretation is what he's aware of, and he's a little puzzled by it, because he kind of reluctantly moves into this. And I think sometimes people do. Not everybody is on that quest as part of their nature. I think life unfolds, and then, that old cliche, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I think then it happens. It's only when you're ripe and ready that you know that this is not, you need to go in the other direction. But it is, you're absolutely right. It is all interpretation on a momentary basis in our lives. Absolutely. It's constant.
So when you say you don't really put him in a state, you don't finish it up and they lived happily ever after,
Right.
of course, but I mean, just that's the true realization that freedom isn't a state. Freedom is just realizing that the interpretation is flexible and arbitrary, and that
Absolutely.
it goes up and it goes down. The rains and sun shines too, and
And I'm sorry.
that's just freedom that I see.
I
So
agree. I agree.
so he did find freedom once he realized that.
Yeah, and there's a relief with that freedom because he can look at all the things that are happening and good, again, if we want to label them good and bad, and see them from a different perspective. The shift in this case is from his head to his heart. And I think that that's really the difference. I mean, when you start seeing everything through the filter of your mind, it's a shifting thing, whether it's physiological or, as you said, where does that come from? But with the heart, it's a constant. And so you constantly remind yourself of where to get back to, even especially if there's been a rough day or a rough moment or whatever. Um, Not to interpret that too deeply as another story. Get off the story and get into the deeper aspect. Absolutely.
So often we say the head or the heart, and as if there was like two places that you go, but there's a plenty of in between too, because there might
Right.
be a time when we really, really know that all these interpretations are arbitrary and that this is life. These very things right in front of me are my life. But still, maybe we don't really open to it. We might just go harumph,
Yeah.
there's my life, and really, but we really don't open up and somehow get inclusive about it. We just say, "Oh yeah, well I know that's my life. Goodbye." It goes under the bridge, right?
It's resignation versus acceptance. They're like a resignation to this is it versus an acceptance, which is a different kind of embrace, just as you kind of put your arms out. Is exactly two different, they're very different. A guy who's resigned to this is life. Uh, I'm not quite sure what that means, but acceptance is not the word I would use. A lot of people resign themselves to their lives and intellectually feel there's an acceptance to it. And that's still not quite, you know, deep enough for them to really get a real sense of what's going on. And that shift from the mind to the heart, uh, it comes with a lot of acid reflux sometimes. There's a lot of movement between those two zones that can be, painful because it takes, as I've read many times, it takes a little bit of courage. It's not normal to be that introspective and look at those things deeper. Most people don't want to or can't or aren't guided. I was very thankful to find a teacher and teachers who helped guide me. Without that guidance, I would have been lost, totally lost. But the move was not smooth. It was not, oh, okay, we'll shut off the mind switch and move to the heart switch. And okay, good, thank you. It was painful. There was some pain in there.
Some of it is, being in the heart is kind of a display, and maybe that's kind of feels weird in this society, to display yourself that way. And
Right.
I mean, it's true that a lot of I've heard even gurus say that life's a journey, but it's only 13 inches. Meaning going from the head to the heart, right?
Right.
It takes a lifetime to do it.
It's a long 13 inches. You're right. I like you say, this is what it is, and knowing that gives you a freedom. Knowing it deeply gives you more freedom. Just sometimes during the day or week you can forget, and life again kind of tricks you back into the interpretation of your life and the game versus that inner quiet and such that you're able to kind of be just naturally without any effort. It's an interesting part of the journey. I think it's the end all of all of us is understanding that. I think that's my character and myself had to go through the journeys of life, like all of us, to find that. It is the freest you're ever going to feel, for sure. ever.
I guess I could admit, that I don't know. And you say sometimes you're back into life and you're really going on your strategies, and it can. I'm sure that happens. And with me, I would say I would admit that I can never get really sucked back into believing them anymore. I can really get go into playing them, playing the
Yes.
strategies, and I know that it just I don't know. But I mean, I would have to admit that I'm not really celebrating this moment in a very I mean, it's a judgment to say, well, it
Mm-hmm.
could be more, how about Buddha? He was blown away.
Mm-hmm.
What about bliss and all these things? Why not every moment? Those are all kind of great stories, that, but I mean, I'm sure that I could have a lot more fun than I do.
I think you're right. The right word is it plays me. It can play me for whatever period of time. But you're right. There's a quick understanding of not getting wrapped into the story, but it can play you. I think that's the right word at a certain point. I agree. I agree.
Sometimes when we look at the story, we're trying to say if the right story is told, and we can always judge your ending and and your the process of your movie and then of your character, and then saying, well, what about he should have went here, or should have done that, or he could have. But I mean, the main story is just to break the trance. I think no matter how you do it and wherever you get, and once the trance is broken, then all possibilities. The trance being the belief that my words are the truth, that my ideas and thoughts and goals are what's real.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, I guess, I don't know, do we all have to have a period in our lives where we're totally in awe of our own languaging?
I guess not all of us, but I think most of us. I've spoken to a few teachers over the years, and without trying to be too intellectual about it, I remember asking one, how do most people from your experience find the path that they're on? And in simply put, his words were, most people are broken, and they're broken in different ways, and they realize that the redoing their things that they've been doing is not going to work, and they turn inwards instead of searching outwards. So I think, unfortunately, it seems to be the fate of most of us. I'm not sharing that as a truth ultimate, that most people are broken in some way, and others are fortunate that may have been broken previously. I don't want to try and guess, but in this life, wake up a little bit sooner without having to break, without having to be caught up. But I think breaking is one of the many, many ways that people find, the path of the truth.
Yeah, that's very well spoken, because definitely that's one of the ways, and some people stress it as kind of, when you listen to them, you think that's the only way, that you really need to what would you say, to somehow live through your delusions,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to crash down in order to make it happen, in order to make it apparent that they are delusions.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but in the same sense, it's very fascinating to look at the young, at the youth.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's even some teachers that are very young, and they might even say they suffered and it was all terrible. And then when you quiz them, it's only 18 months or something instead of 18 years or 30,
Mm-hmm.
36 years, or and you kind of have to juggle at that, Or some people have even said, I had this huge experience, and I said, well, weren't you shocked by it or something? And, well, I mean, I think for like 5 minutes or something. And I think, whoa.
Lightning bolt.
uh,
Like I say, I wish I can only say my experience has been that move and that shift is been gradual and painful, and the illusions of things didn't want to let go so quickly. Yet I knew that where I was headed was correct. There was no doubt. It was just the doubts would pop up only when things got tough again. When facing new obstacles. But it took me 40 40-ish years in this lifetime before it hit me between the eyes. So it took I had a good run in the illusion until the
Yeah.
illusion broke. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, you said something really interesting because you said facing new obstacles, but it seems like really, really what we hate is facing the same obstacle.
uh,
Like the new ones could be at least something.
well, the new ones are scary, but you're right. The repetitive ones are painful. Yes, they appear to hurt a little bit more, each time. You're right. You're right. Yet when the repetition is gone, the new ones scare the hell out of you too. So there's a no win situation. But you're right. The repetitive ones can be very, very difficult, or appear to be very difficult, depending on where you're at. I agree.
Well, I mean, if they were all new, you would think you're a genius. All these new obstacles, and then I must have solved it because it doesn't come back. But it's the
Right.
whole idea that I'm helpless. I'm helpless with this. It just keeps coming back around again, around and around.
Yes, I agree. And, just it's in a different shape, a different form, but the same thing. Um, I'm with you 100%. Um, and everyone who I speak with, as you speak to many people, if you share without getting into the story, I think it's pretty much exactly the same thing over and over until you let it go, until you let it be, whatever word you want to use. And then when it does appear, okay.
I have talked to several filmmakers, and I'm kind of always interested in it. And I always kind of like asking, what kind of story can you tell?
Mhm.
And again, going back to the 50 cultures or 50 main
Mhm.
societies, each one had their own series of stories, and we're telling our story. And somehow, I don't know, maybe it's just commercially, we can't get out of a story. I mean, you'd think we could tell some other stories as an experiment, and get out of the commercial. Okay, we're saying it won't sell if it doesn't have a conflict and all this stuff,
Mhm.
and if there's not a hero in it somehow, and all these things that really are kind of like anti-life in a way, because I mean, we can all worship heroes, but it's so, even sports, it's so much abstract that it doesn't really touch our life. In other words, the more we worship a hero, the more we're just a piece of meat.
Yeah, with
And
expectations. Yeah, expectations to meet those hero roles, whether those heroes are subliminal heroes on TV or the bigger than life heroes on the screen. And then they set up, unfortunately, for most of us, expectation to fulfill that, to be that if you aren't that, then somehow or another you're not doing it right. And I think that you're right. The commercial aspect of filmmaking, um, it is a matter of what's going to sell, unfortunately. There probably are films being made that many of us don't even see, myself included, that may have attempted to do, a more of a journey that's not as fraught with all the cliches Hollywood puts together. But it doesn't get the view, it doesn't get the window to be shown. And that's part of the obstacle because the mainstream still believes in the other stuff so strongly. Not that I have any problem with it, but just that it's hard to break through that. Very hard. A lot of good films get made and, just don't get the light of day besides, being able to get out there and DVD and so on. And in the clutter of the world today, it's very hard to let people know it's there.
definitely, we're probably talking about the limitations of the distribution system, which is
Yeah.
theaters and big time movies and also mainstream television and stuff like that. And so that has a very limited view. And the limitation of it is that it costs so much to do it.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so then it has to, be of such a formula that it appeals to some kind of a mass, whatever is the mass.
Yeah, it has to have a proven. I mean, if you turn on the television without getting into a media discussion, how many cop shows are there? I mean, there must be 30 cop shows on TV, and it's the same formulas and the same thing. If you walk into an executive at a network and you have a formula for a show that doesn't include doctors or lawyers or policemen, you're probably up against it in a drama. So, you're beginning to see some of these family-oriented shows, but limited. They have a breakthrough. So it is a matter of distribution, as you're saying, being able to get past it. And the more that things are owned by larger corporations, and I'm not, again, poo-pooing them, the more I'm saying is that it's even harder because they're not content with making $1 million where you and I would say, Jesus, that was wonderful. They would need to make $100 million. So they've upped the ante, so it's harder and harder for people to get smaller things out there. And I think that's what ultimately is the problem with the big corporate media at the moment.
Well, I mean, I guess I would poo-poo them, like I'm not interested at all in what they're doing, and I wouldn't really, I don't know, I don't think I get too involved in their products, but who knows? I guess I do.
Someone taught me when I was doing my ad agency, and I think it was one of the teachers, and Stuart said to me, you employ X amount of people, you're pleasing clients who are selling product that are supporting families and so on. And when you sort of look at it, you recognize that I'm not saying everything is justifiable, but again, if you recognize that some of what's going on for the moment is what's needed to support people, until there's a shift in consciousness and so on, you can't really make a change. So when I say I don't poo-poo them, I don't necessarily agree with everything they're doing. I just sort of look at it as, okay, this is the way it is. And so we try to use the internet and such, which is more democratized. But the problem with that right now is, as we were saying, there's a lot of noise, a lot of stuff on the internet, obviously. So you're caught betwixt and between. There is a free place on the internet, but it's very hard to get people to pay attention because there's just so many distractions. So.
Well, there's a lot of noise, but I mean, I guess the beauty is people like Google, that can search, and so keywords and searching somehow seems to work in a really quick time, and so then okay, like you can run an ad agency and help people get pleased and support their kids, but in the meantime, until there's a shift of consciousness, well, how does that happen? I mean, I want to be part of that formula, or I want to make it hit the road somewhere.
I agree.
And so then it would be not to maybe make full-length movies, just to make some that are affordable, that shorts or something like that, or to try to experiment with different kind of formulas.
I agree. It's tough when you're trying to raise funds to put things together, because immediately, again, most people, unless there's a blind support for the subject, are going to sit there and say, well, what's the marketing plan? How do you expect? It is a tough road to hoe, but I think it's possible, and I think people are doing it. You're right. There are different things happening. Absolutely.
Maybe it has to be philanthropic. In other words, you can go to a lot of people that are investing in films, and of course it's really risky, so they want a real high return. And so then somebody out there's got money. I mean, money agglomerates in certain places, and some people want to do some things, and so then I don't know how you can hook those two up.
That's the secret. There's a couple of sites that have these they call them funding sites. I won't get into it too much, but where you can post your film and talk about what it is, and people can visit there and decide to support it. They could get $50 if they wanted to. And it's called, a mass funding. There's a couple of people out there doing that. And so there is the potential. There is the potential for that. But letting the public know that those places exist so that they can help support it or be part of something is the harder part, of the journey of getting that film made, or that, whatever it is, short film, long film, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's doable. Absolutely. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to play my little part in this thing by doing some of that and thinking about how to do it more productively and reach more people, not so much for the sense of ego process, but as much as if I have something to say that I'd like to share, those are the kind of films I want to make. versus, where Hollywood has to show the box office. No one's going to walk in there and say, gee, let's make that film because we want to. So
All
we're all
right, I
this.
understand that.
Yeah.
Because I just want to kind of look at another side, and somehow I want to question whether conflict is really a part of humanity.
No.
When you look at it, of course, empirically, it totally is.
Mm-hmm.
And how you can actually, of course, it is because we live in a conflictual stew.
Mm-hmm.
Collective consciousness has a strong belief in limitation and scarcity, and so then that's the seat of all conflict, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if
But as they say in the film story, as you well know, I think you're pretty well read on it. Without conflict, the story doesn't move forward. And I think to some degree that may be a fact that's embedded in life. We have a bunch of squirrels, thus the name City Squirrel Films, that hang out in our yard. And I watch the conflict between them, between, who's the biggest, who's the toughest, mating season. But they go about it in a very momentary basis. There's a conflict and then they let it go. 30 seconds later, they're sitting next to each other, So I think that it seems to be inevitably part of the stew, but I don't know how much the human race has made it 10 times worse.
In other words, we abstract it and have it be an entity even when it's not happening.
That's correct. Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what again, just sort of anecdotal, but I think that the conflict is part of existence. And again, when we keep dragging that conflict out, I look at things again. I'm not politically motivated, but I look at things like Cuba and I say, why are we still not talking to them? I don't understand. I don't understand it. But so there's something that happened maybe 50 years, maybe 60 years ago, who knows? And still, and I laugh about it. As I said, there's a perpetuation of conflict there, but we don't even know what the conflict is anymore. If I asked anybody younger than the age of 60, they would go, we don't talk to Cuba? They wouldn't even have any.
God, I think I remember once when Fidel Castro was on the Jack Parr show.
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Like
You're
he
right.
was a new guy, like he was a new hope, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think and again, I'm not defending Cuba's policy. I would never, politically, like I say, I'm just saying is I'd like to understand what the conflicts are, so that people can be helped in that country, or help people that are here that are Cuban feel the freedom to go back. I know a friend who couldn't even go back there. It's tough, and I don't even know what the conflict is anymore. So I'm not politically or defending Castro by any means. I don't know enough. I'm just saying, as an example, what is the conflict? I don't know, and I think that's how we perpetuate things, unfortunately.
Something that occurred to me just a short time ago, maybe a month ago, was how I just realized how, on a world level, everything is approached with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a key ingredient to how people get along. I'm not saying they ever do get along, because anxiety is at the core of every relationship, at least at the world level. And so then that's all about environment, about energy, about world peace, about arms, about security, about, food production,
Mm-hmm.
about disease and pests and world agriculture. Everything is all only approached through anxiety and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And, and if you want to tone it down a little bit, it's concern, at least, which means that things aren't right, and that, it's a vibration of closure. Somehow it creates an emotion in the physical body that is a contraction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so then we always wonder how come for all these thousands of years the outcome has always been a contraction.
Hmm.
And I wonder if that it seems like it might be obvious that that's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, um, anxiety is the understated part of the whole thing. I think we live in a very anxious world because of the media and because of everything we know. I mean, at one time we didn't know beyond our 5 blocks or whatever it might be, and now we have access, can tap into the world, so that we see the anxiety all over. Again, we're much more aware and at the same time less aware, but it creates anxiety about it. I, I, I just look at things and I always want to say to myself is we realize that there are things that we used Fidel as an example. You know, there was human rights and issues and things that I'm sure, again, we would all be against. And I think that, the anxiety is embedded in our culture now. Instead of trying to make that work in a relationship, we live with the anxiety and fear of it instead of trying to overcome it and work in a positive way. So I think anxiety is a huge part of our society. I really do. I really do.
You were saying let's see now. One thing I know you said, I remember that part, was that anxiety because of the news media and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the other one is just now something about, I don't know, some words that just crossed that seemed to be relevant, but I kind of lost them.
Okay.
But anyhow, basically, I'm saying that isn't it a belief in anxiety that we had even before there was news media? Because I mean, we believe that if we got angry, we could solve some problems better than if we just stayed lax and let people. I'm not suggesting lax is the opposite of anxiety either.
Right.
I don't want to say that wrong. I mean, but just if say relaxed, let's say, and just kind of worked it out. Somehow we believed that, being upset was a good solution. And we still believe it. We totally believe it. That there's some time when we should be upset. And we should move on that. We totally believe that as a society and as a family member and as an individual human being. And we should be upset with ourselves too. Mm-hmm. We just believe that as part of the formula, that's a real useful and not counterproductive activity. Is it true?
I guess anything that's occurring, it seems to be part of the necessary journey, would be a philosophical way of looking at it. I'm not sure myself about that one, to be honest with you. I think everything is true in the fact that it's there. It's what do we do with it? And I think we've been taught, like you said, to become upset, to become this and react to it versus being able to look at it. There's been times I said, sometimes people do need a punch in the nose. And I don't.
Well, I need a wake-up call anyhow,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
but I mean, we've been taught to have the right to be upset. That's part of our rights as a human being. We have a right to be upset.
Right. Well, again, it's condoned and it's okay. And again, violence is not. It depends on what level of upset. Violence and stuff obviously is a little bit, out of the domain of what I think was intended. But there are times that I believe the nature of humans is to get upset, but again, just for that moment. Again, how long do you take it with you? If upset arises, how long do you take it with you? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, you can look at your squirrels and say, well, there they are tussling over there. Are they upset? I'm not so sure they are upset. They're just acting out tussling, and trying to get the girl.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm misinterpreting the word upset then. Yes, then upset is an emotional reaction to the situation that's gone beyond the situation. Then I agree. There's not that there's no place for it, but we are allowed to do that. And matter of fact, we get rewarded for it if we carry on enough, especially as children. I'm sorry, I misinterpreted the word upset. I don't disagree with you.
You know what? I've been asking myself this, because somehow, okay, let's look at the two basic type of emotions or emotional responses, or somehow the two basic kinds of felt senses or feelings, let's say. And one feeling is kind of a squeezing, it's a surprise, and like it's a knee-jerk reaction of the body to kind of like, I guess it's a surprise. And I don't know, I guess we could have another surprise too, where we open up, we see something beautiful or that we believe is very just, or, like we see our grandchildren playing or something like that, and we're opened in a way. Wow, that's so cool. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so those are the two, like, could be the two basic kind of flows through the body, like a closing and an opening. Well, one kind of comes with upset and anger and frustration and stuff like that, and the other one somehow is with happiness and curiosity and playfulness and joy and happiness and so on and so on. And somehow one of those things, the closing, is kind of definitely a doing because the cells and everything are kind of squeezing, and the other one is an opening. I don't know if the opening is a doing, because you don't really necessarily. I mean, you can open your hand. That seems to be a doing, but I mean, maybe this opening is just like not doing the closing part, and just might be like a natural relaxation. And so where I'm driving at is like it sometimes seems like what we know, we're used to doing, doing things. What can I do about this? What can I do about this? So we're really into the realm of the squeezing part. And so then where I'm driving at is sometimes it seems easier to be angry than it seems to be in love. And it's easier to take it deeper, number two. And number three, it's easier to believe that there's more energy in anger than there would ever be in love, because we've acted out anger that's been huge. We can storm off and, people could be angry and fight for policemen, criminal with all his anger. But yet with love, why couldn't you have the same amount of energy? And people do, because they say they had these spiritual experiences with gurus and stuff, and this energy rushed through me and all that stuff. But I mean, somehow it's not produced in a way, because doesn't come out of a squeeze. It comes out of a not squeeze. And we're constantly squeezing all our life, living in this anxiety and living in this stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's a kind of a belief that one is more effective than the other, that anger and upsetness is more effective than negotiations or mutual respect or things like that, because we don't let that much energy come through. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking from a man, because a man he can feel a little love, and I say a teaspoonful is enough, They, whoa, that felt good, Okay, now what's next, But how do you know to stay there? And in other words, even yoga and gurus and stuff, they say you're not used to containing these kind of energies. You can't contain it. Your vehicle doesn't contain this power, this energy. And so then as a humanity, we opt for the anxiety part because it seems like it's more potent. And when that's how we maybe believe that it's more effective, it's effective to be upset.
Well, it's a sexier story too to the society. If you're upset or you're angry, makes for good dialogue versus the love thing. It does appeal more to the feminine sensibility, as you were saying about the male. So I think that because the love story, it doesn't seem to generate as much of a response. I think on the male side, is when we're talking about this film, there's a love story embedded in it. And, it's funny how many women came to me and were touched by the love story. I didn't hear many men come up to me and speak about it. They spoke about other stuff. They spoke about things they liked. So I think it is I think a little bit more of a male problem. But anger is rewarded, because there's dialogue with it, what you did, what you told him, what you did. no one gets a lot of attention for giving somebody a hug, and very few people, uh, unfortunately, in day to day, pay enough attention to that. They pay more attention to the headlines, which tend to be violent or anger or upsetment. I agree. I don't know what that's about, but
Yeah.
it appears. Yeah, yeah.
So when you talked about your movie and the love story in it, maybe that, because you don't just say, okay, now this is a love story, guys. It's subliminal, they either get it or they don't, right? So, but I mean, I'm saying like throw some stuff on the table, like just what I said, and just say that. Well, what about that? I mean, we believe that energy is lopsided, that if it runs in a negative way, that it's got all kinds of possibilities. But if it runs in a positive way, it's just like ignored by most people.
Mhm.
And put that on the table with some kind of a story, somehow dramatize that, and that's the challenge of it.
Yeah, it's a possibility. A tough one, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Another thing is dialogue kind of really is wild, because you watch it, you watch so many films of every kind, and of course everything is, the key is the dialogue, really. Somehow that dialogue is a mentalization, and it brings a felt sense with it, just out of a memory pattern.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
every kind of movie has to have a dialogue. I mean, I remember that one movie where a kid went up to Alaska to live in the woods, and
Yeah,
he was totally alone. And yet they needed dialogue, so they had him write a diary.
right.
So it was just a dialogue to himself, But I mean, and the dialogue, I mean, when you watch a soap opera or something, I just wonder, I mean, in your real life, who talks that much? And who would you listen to that much? Nobody. I mean, it really would never happen, right? that people talk that much, and that the meaning of life is another quip, It's like
Yes.
a quick response, and somehow that's the meaning of life. I haven't been able to watch any of that stuff for 20 or 30 years, just thinking, where is that dialogue in my life? It's just not really real.
Yeah, I guess that's the MO of what films have to be about. They're exaggerations, they're not real life. So um, they tend to have a lot more in it than our lives will ever have within an hour and a half. Um, again, not to keep swinging back to where I am, but I tried not to do that as much in my film. It was closer to reality versus uh, Hollywood dialogue. But you're right. But you have to suspend disbelief, is what they say in Hollywood. Suspend disbelief when you go to the movies and just enjoy it. Uh, but again, it sends the wrong signals, or if you want to interpret them as the wrong signals sometimes, and that's the tough part. It is. It's the idea of what the public wants. Look at the explosion of the TMZ kind of celebrity paparazzi, what so and so is doing. When I was a kid, there was one newspaper that nobody ever would, respecting person would ever pick up, so to speak. And now it's just a proliferation of it. So people just make what people want. So it has to be a shift in what people want. And that's still ultimately what we're up against, is a consciousness shift that the public wants different things, wants to be interested, will pay money for whatever it is. And that shift is happening, but it's very slow because the mass media is so strong.
I admit it takes at least a tiny bit of guidance, because I mean, I can remember lots, so many times in my life where I would say, well, why didn't you tell me that before? I just never thought of that. I just never, ever thought of it, that this could be totally different, I've been just playing this one out forever. And, but someone has to come up somewhere in some small place and start to put out these alternatives, I try to do it with these discussions, and they're not all that sought after. I mean, it's pretty dry, just two guys yapping. And so then to tell it with a story or a drama or somehow dramatize some of the things we talk about would be really a challenge, and would be of a lot of interest to me.
Yeah, there's an audience for it. It's I agree, reaching the audience is the tough part, but there definitely is an audience for it. It's difficult to reach. Um, and that's really again, it's distribution, not product. It's the failings of many things in the marketing world. It's not the product, it's how do you get it to people? How do you get them to know about it? Even a targeted group of people who are interested, it's real commitment. We're all playing our little part, what you're doing and what I did with the film and so on. I think we're just playing our part, and whatever people were able to touch, you know, that's one more. And I think that's the way you just have to look at it. I mean, it is a slow process for sure, for sure.
I wonder if you could get out of normal distribution, because one thing that came to me maybe a year ago that because we try to figure out what money is sometimes, a lot of people are talking about prosperity, and they had this thing called the law of attraction that they talked about a lot, maybe even more now, who knows. And they're always talking about health and prosperity, I think. And in a way, the way we run money, it is a distribution system. It's a way we trade goods and services.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way that the value is there has to do with the scarcity. So it is a system that depends on scarcity. In other words, De Beers holds all those diamonds back, because
Mm-hmm.
if they flooded the market with the diamonds, or even if Russia opened the gold mines and just said, here, have a lot of gold, it would be catastrophic for what they're up to.
Mm-hmm.
And so to feed people with, or give health care with money is kind of like counterproductive, because it has to be scarce in order to make it work in the
Mm-hmm.
private sector. And the same with the information that we're giving, we're counting on it if we want to fit in that commercial system, and we have to create a scarce something that's perceived to value and is basically scarce, but we don't necessarily, at least I don't necessarily want it to be scarce.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. It is just unfortunately it is just a matter of that where all of us that are speaking about non-duality or the like. There is a big community, worldwide community, obviously beyond just the spiritual community, and little things happen. I see it happen. Looking at Oprah just talks about Eckhart Tolle, and his books all of a sudden go on the bestseller list. So little blips happen every now and then, but it's not digested in the mainstream. It's digested in the mainstream so quickly that you need to have more of it out there for people to really pay closer attention. But I do believe people find their path. I really do, whether that's through an Eckhart or through looking at one of your interviews, or maybe they saw my film. It puts people on the path, or at least awareness of the path, and that's all you can really, expect right now. But I think it's shifting. In my heart, I really feel that there are more and more people attuned to it than there were 25 years ago as a percent of the population. I don't mean in numbers, especially here in this country. I sense a little bit of a shift, and not just in my little world, but in listening to people. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. I'm not sure.
That helps, huh?
Yes, yes, yes.
But, I mean, you mentioned non-duality, and non-duality is kind of like what is it?
Mm-hmm.
It's really abstract, really, if you want to go for it. And it's supposed to say that it's the only thing that's not abstract. It's really weird, It's something so abstract to so many is what's supposedly totally non-abstract, and that everything that we say and do is really an abstraction. And,
Right.
and it's really kind of like...
Well, that's
But
right. Well,
yeah, but I mean, I don't know if that's the path. That's not going to be the path for the collective. That is only like some kind of. It's not even a core truth. It's just like a core abstraction, maybe.
true abstraction, which makes it hard for most people to, get in tune to. Mm-hmm.
Be interested, even.
Yes. Yes.
They're abstract enough.
Yes.
So then somehow, another kind of a look at it is required, I believe, and that it it should be another kind of a look at it by storytellers, really, that can somehow dramatize another kind of a look at it and just put it out there in a way.
Yeah, it's sometimes people do it. There was a horrible film recently, and I shouldn't call it horrible, but I didn't think it was very good, although great people in it, Inception, which talked about dreams within dreams. Now, it was not about what we're talking about, but it was a mainstream approach at looking at getting inside people's heads and how they plant dreams and how their interpretations change. So on a high level or whatever, you can see that there were some seeds about what we talk about here. So every now and then something tries, doesn't necessarily hit it 100%, but it tries. So, I give them credit for that, whether it works or doesn't.
In other
My,
words, I didn't see that one, but dreams within dreams, and then they should have taken it backwards too and said, "Well, what's the dream? Who's the dreamer? Is a dream too, right?"
appreciate you having a little bit of a dialogue and talking about my film a little bit. It's appreciated. Thank you.
For sure, we'll show where you can get it at the bottom. We'll put a link and.
Great. Thank you, and I appreciate everyone listening to me if they stood through this whole thing, and thank you for your support.
Well, let's both of us think about, telling a story, a different new story, and seeing. And I guess maybe just like what you were saying is the first thing to do is to see find a new way to get it out there. Or maybe the story is not the same heft, where it needs to such an expense to put it together, and somehow with a if we put our story on a diet or our film on a diet, and
I agree.
and then we can be more flexible in how to put it out, and then maybe we can say more radical things. Radical not meaning shock value, but radical meaning like a break from what we think is reality is all about, and let's just take an alternative view.
Good idea. No, I'm with you. I'm actually writing a short film, trying to at the moment, and trying to grapple with those same ideas versus a feature. But you're absolutely right. There's other ways to get out there. It's embracing the technology, I think, and finding the audience. I think those are the ways to do it right now. And shorter may be better because it's also more achievable quicker. And otherwise the expense of a feature is pretty tough.
Right.
Pretty tough.
But I mean, even a series of shorts could actually attract investors.
Yes, that was one of my thinking of what we're working on now, myself and the producer, is a short film of a long script that we have. And it's an idea that we're kicking around to use that as a tool to move forward into a bigger thing. But you're absolutely correct. There's other ways to do it.
I really thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Richard. It was a pleasure. Stay well over there, and thanks.
And thank you, everyone, for coming. Anthony Tarsitano, a film called Calling It Quits, and really quite nicely done. I saw it twice. And so that's it for today. And keep in tune. We try to bring some good stuff to you. So provocative, let's say, or alternative, or... Okay.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.